Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to fourth week at the Oxford Union. Today, it really is a pleasure to welcome Tony Benn back to the institution that he was president of back in his student days. Tony Benn is one of the best-loved figures in British politics. Born a hereditary peer, he campaigned to renounce his Viscount title in order to be legally allowed to run for Parliament, and his ambitions were realised with the passage of the Peerage Act in 1963. Mr. Benn has held numerous high-profile positions, including Minister of Technology, Chairman of the Labour Party, Industry Secretary, and Energy Secretary. He has really been one of the leading voices of the left throughout most of our generation and before. Best known to our generation for his work as president of the Stop the War Coalition, a role he has held since he retired from Parliament in 2001 in order to spend more time in politics. Now, as one of the country's most preeminent opponents to the conflicts in both Iraq and Afghanistan, it really is a pleasure now, 10 years after the war in Iraq, to welcome Tony Benn here. And I'd like to invite him to speak instead of me, because I'm sure you're a lot more interested in what he has to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to your questions, and all I want to do is just to open up the single question: how does your generation succeed in overcoming the problems that you face? Because we live at a time when there's mass unemployment, when there's a growth of nuclear weapons all over the world, when there are all sorts of problems of one kind and another, and many of them are presented to us as if they were insoluble. How can we possibly deal with a global economy dominated by banks and multinational corporations? How can we cope with it when they seem to be running our economy? How can we deal with all the other problems? And so that's the question that I want simply to put. How do you deal with these things? And when I look at my life, when I came here 70 years ago as a 17-year-old student, the problems were also pretty insoluble. At that time, we were by no means sure we would defeat the Germans in the war. We had had mass unemployment in the 1930s, and things were very, very difficult. And so the question is, how did those problems get solved, to see whether it gives us any guidance as to how we might solve the problems that we face today. In 1943, when I had just left the university and was in the RAF, we were going to South Africa to be trained as pilots. Considered a bit too dangerous to train people here because the Germans were all over the shop. So they sent us to South Africa to learn. And we had a meeting on board the ship on war aims, because in wartime, everybody always discusses what you want to come out of the war. And so I was sent to see the colonel in charge of troops to get permission to have a meeting on war aims, and he said, "No politics in it. Is there, Ben?" So I said, "Oh no," and of course we had the most brilliant political discussion. And one lad got up and he made a speech which I've never forgotten, and this is what he said. He said, in the 1930s we had mass unemployment, but he said we don't have mass unemployment in wartime. He said, if you can have full employment killing Germans, why can't you have full employment building hospitals, building schools, recruiting nurses, recruiting doctors? And that was the secret of the 1945 election decision, that we would apply the same determination to meet the needs of peace that you did to meet the needs of war. Somebody got up and he said, in wartime, nobody says I can't bomb Berlin because I've exceeded my budget. And you do it because it has to be done. And that's how we built the National Health Service and the welfare state. And then, of course, with the passage of time, rationing became very burdensome, and there was a change of government, and the Labour government was defeated, and we drifted back into a situation where we have the unemployment that I mentioned. But the point really that sticks in my mind is that that generation, by the effort it made, changed the prospects for the people of Britain. It did open up the prospect of free health care, pensions and improvements, and it was done by people determined to do it, and because public opinion had been changed by the discussion about what should be done. And when I look back even further in history, long before my time, how did we abolish slavery? I mean, slavery was very well established here. How was it abolished? Well, people decided they wouldn't have it anymore, and there were some very courageous leaders who campaigned against it. How did women get the vote? When my mother was born in 1897, she didn't have the vote. And to begin with, if you demanded votes for women, to begin with, they ignored you. Then if you went on, they said you were mad. And if you went on after that, they locked you up. And then in the end, it happened. And that's because people put the effort in, thought about it, campaigned for it, and that's how all progress is made. That's what I'm really trying to say. Very simple. If you want anything done, you've got to work to do it. And if you do work to do it, you'll find it's very, very hard work. There are a lot of people against you. But if you carry on, you can do it. And my experience of progress is very simple. If you start with a sensible idea like votes for women, to begin with, they ignore you. Then they attack you. Then they imprison you. Then you win, and then you can't find anyone at the top who doesn't claim to have thought of it in the first place. That is how progress is made. So if we approach the problems of the future in that spirit, we shall succeed. And the success will depend very largely on what you do, what this generation does, because we need a major change in thinking at the moment. And it'll only be brought about if people like yourself think it out for yourself and campaign for what you believe to be right. Okay, thank you for listening.